Hello, I'm Mark Baer. You're watching the YourTown television program. I'm with Jeffrey Munks, a serial entrepreneur, and this is the third segment of this interview. We started to do an 18-minute interview, and we got through the first question, and we had a second segment. We got through the second question, and we decided we will continue. So welcome.
Thank you.
And let's start with Adopt a Ship program. Let's just jump right in.
Okay. I think it was 1997 or 1998. It wasn't that long before then that the internet had snuck out of DARPA and entered the mainstream, but people were still kind of scratching their heads and asking what's the real value proposition for the internet? What is this World Wide Web thing? Well, at that time, I had been one of the early employees at California State University, Monterey Bay, the new campus that was opened on the footprint of the former Fort Ord. I was working for the provost, and I had started this entrepreneurial incubator called EduVenture Projects. And my mission was to bring new technologies and folks who were associated with those technologies to the campus to help them establish their technological orientation and footing. Well, I was working with a recently retired three-star admiral, a guy by the name of Phil Quast, who was just a wonderful person. When he got out of the Navy, I got a phone call from President Peter Smith at the university, and he said, "Can you take a meeting with a three-star admiral?" And I said, "Sure, why?" And he said, "Well, I don't know what to do with an admiral, and he's coming out to visit." So I took the meeting, and I just fell in love with the guy, just absolute salt of the earth. So he moved into my building on the lower campus, and the two of us started working together. And one day he came to me and he said, "I need some help. There is a small ship, one of the smallest ships in the Navy. It's called USS Typhoon. It's a patrol craft class warship, and it's about the size and configuration of a Coast Guard cutter. But it's attached to a battle group, and it's getting ready to deploy to the Mediterranean, where it's going to stand off the west coast of Africa. Because of all the unrest that's occurring there, the American military wanted to be close by in case any of the embassies had any issues or problems." Well, the Navy has long had a program called Adopt a Ship. There was a high school for developmentally disabled kids in Denver, Colorado that had adopted Typhoon. And under the traditional program, those kids would write letters and send them via snail mail to the sailors aboard Typhoon. Well, imagine how long it would take for a letter to get from Denver, Colorado to the East Coast and then to someplace in Africa where it would be ferried out to this ship underway. A long time. And for the sailors to write back to these kids, a long time. So you're talking about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks just to say hi and acknowledge that hello. And Admiral Quast was familiar. He knew that the internet existed, but he didn't know how it might play into something like this. And when he asked me that question, boy, my mind just started firing on all cylinders. And in very short order, I had him committed to carrying me out to Norfolk, Virginia, to where the carrier USS Washington was preparing to lead the Washington battle group into the Mediterranean on a deployment. And he arranged for me to sit down with the commander of the battle group, a young one-star admiral named Mike Mullen. And in his stateroom, I laid out an idea, and the idea was this: let me have access to a little bit of your bandwidth. They have these routines called dynamic bandwidth allocation, which dictates that when there isn't a real high operational tempo and there's room on the network, we could take some of that network bandwidth and make it possible for the sailors aboard Typhoon to communicate through the network with the kids at this high school in Denver. So when Admiral Mullen heard about this proposal, he didn't hesitate for a moment. He said, "It's a great idea. Compressing the time it takes for kids to communicate with their sailors and vice versa, I'm all for it. You can have the bandwidth." So I went back to Monterey, and with some gifted students and support, we created a website for the Typhoon Project, and we ran it off a server at Cal State Monterey Bay. And when we turned the project up, kids in Denver were able to communicate near real time with their sailors aboard the ship. They were able to exchange emails, they were able to exchange photographs. I had gone out to Little Creek in Virginia, where Typhoon had been preparing to deploy with the Washington Battle Group, and I brought a video card, I brought a modem, and I brought 500 feet of old-fashioned twisted pair copper phone line. And the idea was, when the ship put ashore in Ghana or wherever they were, tying up, they could literally unspool the 500 feet of phone line, plug it into a phone jack at the dock, have the other end plugged into their computer aboard Typhoon, and be able to communicate with the kids. And talk about a home run. That law of unintended consequence reared its head, and I started getting emails and letters from the parents and the spouses of sailors who had been aboard Typhoon saying, the skipper of the ship allowed family members to come into this program. So for the first time ever, when a son, when a daughter, when a husband or a wife was deployed, the family member at home was now able to communicate with them through the Typhoon Project.
Of course.
Yeah, it was just absolutely wonderful.
That's so, wow.
So it's a new way of running an old program. Adopt-A-Ship is no longer stuck with snail mail. It's done online. And that was, again, in 1997 or so. So it was the first program of its kind.
So now let's move down the road, and then you're assistant dean at San Francisco State University, and you're recruiting CSUMB faculty to help the senior executives at China Bank. So how did this proceed?
In 2000, I had just sold my e-learning company, Arista Knowledge Systems, to Digital Think. I agreed to stay with them for 6 months to facilitate the integration of our people, our processes, and our product into the Digital Think ecosystem, and then I left. I took an appointment as Assistant Dean and Executive Director for the Downtown Center in San Francisco for San Francisco State University. And when I came on board, the Dean, Dr. Lucienne Geiselman, said, I'd like you to look across the global landscape and see if you can find an opportunity for us to create an international program that would be in the sweet spot for some of our faculty. Well, it didn't take me long to come up with an idea. China at the time was positioning for WTO ascension. They wanted to join the World Trade Organization. But joining the WTO meant opening up their markets, including their financial markets, to Western competition. And they were woefully unequipped to do so. Chinese banks at the time were carrying on average, I think it was about 40% bad paper, bad loans. Now for a U.S. bank carrying 2%, that would get the SEC and the feds on their backs in a heartbeat. But the reason the Chinese banks were carrying so much bad paper, they were all government run, government owned, and if a party official said to People's Bank, you're going to give this guy a loan to create a resort someplace, forget the fact that the guy was, his brother-in-law or his cousin. The bank had to give him the loan because the party said give him the loan. Well, what I came up with was an idea to teach Western-style banking products and services to Chinese banks, because there were no products and services. Chinese banks just made loans, and they facilitated simple savings accounts for citizens. That's it. And when you look at all the products and services that a Western bank offers to its constituents, to its clients, it'll just boggle your mind. So, knowing that the California State University system was home to the nation's largest collection of Chinese American faculty in banking, finance, economics, and other related financial fields.
Now, how did you know this? How did you find this out?
Well, from my work at Language Line.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out where this idea comes from.
Yeah, no, I was intimately familiar with the linguistic demographics of the state and the country. So I knew there was this treasure chest of intellectual capital represented by Chinese American faculty in the CSU system, and I also knew that California was home to a very vibrant, very large Chinese American banking community. So I brought together some faculty members, Chinese American, with some bankers. So I had the theoretical side and the practical side. Put them in a room and said, what would you say if I proposed to craft a week-long executive education program for senior Chinese bankers in China to teach them Western banking products and services? And they just went nuts. And when you talk about the CSU system, it wasn't just San Francisco State. We also reached to Cal State Monterey Bay. In fact, the program coordinator, the lead person on the program came from CSUMB, Sandy Hale, out of the business program. An excellent developer, an excellent communicator, an excellent course designer. And Sandy took overall lead role in stitching together these different faculty members and bankers. And then, we needed to have the market, right? So through another colleague who I worked with on a board of a Chinese American company, I got to go to Beijing, and he set me up with 16 meetings in a 4-day period with the leaders of the biggest banks in China. So Industrial and Commercial Bank, People's Bank, all of them. And over those 4 days, I pitched this week-long executive development program for the senior leaders of China's banks, and they loved it. And we wound up with a standing room only audience of about 35 to 40 bankers who showed up for the inaugural program, which was done in, I believe it was June of 2001. It was a smashing success. They loved it. And the president of the China Association of Banks and his colleagues said they wanted to institute this as a formal program that we would do once a quarter in Beijing. And then after we had done it for a year, we would start taking graduates from the program in Beijing and bring them to San Francisco, where we would pair them with Chinese American bankers in Wells Fargo Bank, Bank of America, you name it, and let them job shadow for a week while we did intensive training programs for them on the campus at San Francisco State University. And an agreement was struck. We had it in concept, and we had outlined it, and we organized a signing ceremony, and we picked a date. I went and reserved the San Francisco Yacht Club, got commitments to attend the signing ceremony from Governor Gray Davis, from CSU Chancellor Charles Reed. I believe that the mayor at the time was Willie Brown. We had all kinds of folks who were committed to coming. And on the China side, we had the Minister of Education, the President of the China Association of Banks, and the leaders of all these banks, all to descend on the Yacht Club in San Francisco on Friday, September 14th,
oh my God.
2001, for the signing ceremony. Well, as you can imagine, on Tuesday of that week, our world changed permanently. And on Wednesday, I received a phone call from China that said, we can't come. In fact, we can't travel to the United States at all. We have no idea when we'll be able to resume normal business between the U.S. and China. But with the events of 9/11, the world just changed. And that program was put on what turned out to be permanent hold.
Let's go to 9/11. And you became first Deputy Executive Learning Officer for the U.S. Navy. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
And so let's go from 9/11. What happens now?
Sure. Shortly after 9/11 happened, I was still on the campus at San Francisco State. I decided to leave and return to Monterey, come back home. And I picked up where I left off on the campus at Cal State Monterey Bay. And Admiral Quast was still there. He and I came up with a project that we were going to do with the Governor's Office of Emergency Services in Sacramento. So I had him in my car one day driving up to Sacramento, and the phone rang. And it was the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, an admiral by the name of Fox Fallon. I had him on speaker. And Phil Quast, when he retired, he had actually been held over as a possible candidate to become the Chief of Naval Operations. So he's very well known across Navy. Fox said, Phil, Vern Clark, the then CNO of Navy, wants you to come back. And Phil said, hey, I've given the Navy 36 years. I'm retired, and I'm loving what I'm doing now. And Fox said, you don't understand. Vern's got a new initiative, and he wants you to lead it. You're going to be the Navy's first executive learning officer. And Phil said, what's an executive learning officer? And Fox said, well, he wants to create something like what General Electric has at Crotonville, kind of a finishing school for admirals. It would be executive education for the Navy's admirals. And Phil said, I don't know anything about executive education. I don't know anything about, adult learning, so I'm not your guy. And he literally ended the phone call. And when he did, I'm driving and I looked at him and I said, Phil, are you crazy? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, you love Navy. You've given your life to Navy, and here's a chance to help change the culture of the Navy, and you're the guy to do it. And he said, I don't know anything about executive education. And I said, I do. I'll quit my job. I'll join you full time, and I'll work on all this stuff with you. You're the guy who can make phone calls, get meetings, get doors open, and get things done within not just Navy, but the Department of Defense and all the other services. And he said, would you really do that? I said, in a heartbeat. So we called Fox Fallon back on the spot on my car phone. And Phil said, Fox, I've changed my mind. I'll do it. And he did. So the Chief of Naval Operations, Vern Clark, peeled $1 million out of his discretionary fund and set up a program called the Executive Learning Office, appointed Phil as the first Executive Learning Officer, and I became his deputy. So my role was Deputy Executive Learning Officer for the United States Navy. That was in April of 2002, and that started an incredible 9-year journey.
I'm Mark Baer with Jeffrey Munks. You're watching YourTown Television, and if you stay tuned, we'll have the next segment.